what may happen to student loans as Trump overhauls education. There's 4 things to know about Trump's effort to dismantle the Department of Education. President Trump, he kicked off the process of dismantling the Department of Education by signing an executive order on Thursday. The move aims to fulfill a long-standing campaign promise and shift more power over education to the states. While the president cannot completely shut down the agency without approval from Congress, the department announced earlier this month that nearly half of its staff will leave through layoffs and voluntary buyouts. It remains to be seen what will happen to the agency's programs and functions, and legal challenges to Trump's executive order are likely. Federal funding for students with disability who fall under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, along with Title I funding for low-income schools and federal student loan payments, will not be changed by the order. A senior administration official said, however, the order bans programs or activities receiving agency funds from advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, or gender ideology. Supporters of the order have said that education oversight should be returned to the states and parents, while opponents argue that the move will harm children and their ability to learn. Here's what to know about the Trump administration's effort to dismantle the Department of Education. Low-income, rural, and disabled students could be impacted. The Department of Education provides tens of billions of dollars in funding to support millions of students in low-income and rural areas and those with disabilities, and advocates are concerned about what the agency's shuttering could mean for them. The agency funnels more than $18 billion in supplemental funding annually to local school districts to provide extra academic support to schools with high rates of poverty. Title I grants serve about 26 million low-income students. The dismantling of the department, along with the loss of many of its staffers, raises concerns about ensuring the states and districts will use the federal funds in the best ways to lead to positive outcomes for students, said Wee James, Senior Director for K-12 Education Policy at the left-leaning Center for American Progress. For instance, she questioned whether states will track students' progress. Also, rural and smaller school districts rely on the Department of Education for technical assistance and for the implementation of the Title I grants and other programs. She noted it's very important that we continue to question how these cuts are going to impact students, because indeed they are, James said. There's going to be a loss of expertise and a loss of data collection, oversight, and accountability. Department of Education also sets the parameters around accommodations for disabled students, ensuring that they have the right to a free and appropriate public education. The agency helps fund schools for the deaf and blind in the U.S. and oversees the Rehabilitation Services Administration, which provides services that aim to help Americans with disabilities live more independently and land jobs. The department provides more than $15 billion annually to help serve 7.4 million students through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, known as IDEA. What happens to these functions remains to be seen, but Project 2025, a sweeping plan to overhaul the federal government written by several people in Trump's orbit, called for the functions to be shifted to the Department of Health and Human Services, which is not as knowledgeable about the programs, said Mia Ivis-Rublee, Senior Director for the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress. That could make it much more difficult for students with disabilities to get the services they need, she said. What we do know is we're going to see a radical change in the way we provide or don't provide services to disabled students, she said. Questions remain around management of federal student loans. The Department of Education has struggled to find a viable alternative agency to manage its massive student debt portfolio. According to 2 sources involved in the discussions, the loan portfolio totals a staggering $1.8 trillion in debt, with an estimated 40% of loans past due. The sources said, up from what CNN has previously reported based on publicly available information. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced ahead of the executive order signing on Thursday that certain critical functions like student loans and administering grants to at-risk students will remain with the Department of Education, but Trump later said those functions would be redistributed to other agencies. The discrepancy could set up a challenge for Education Secretary Linda McMahon, who is required by law to carry out some of the department's congressionally mandated functions, including administering loans and providing grants for schools in high poverty areas. I think that the Trump administration is really playing with fire here, because what could end up happening is that, jobs that are supposed to be taken care of aren't being taken care of because they're cutting so many programs, and that's a real possibility. And then someone like Linda McMahon ends up getting blamed for it. I see that a lot of these policies that Trump is implementing is not going to work out and backfire in his face. I think the Department of Education actually was in some aspects failing. But I think obviously for disabled students, for instance, that's an area where it was important. And I think that, we'll see that people in rural areas and, people with disabilities aren't getting the education that they need. And I think that overall, I think that in government, there's so many people who have had these jobs for years and were not doing the job that they were supposed to do. And I've had my own experiences with the Department of Education. And I know there's a lot of people who work for these government programs, including the VA as well. And they're not taking care of the people that they're supposed to be taking care of. They're just collecting paychecks. And I think that we have to get rid of that mindset in society where it's about the paycheck as opposed to the actual job that you're supposed to be doing. But I think that it's really important that, the Department of Education has announced that it's going to cut nearly 50% of its workforce. That's a lot of people. And for the people who are losing their jobs with the Department of Education, maybe this will put them on the right path, where they can start a new career, because it didn't work out with them at the Department of Education. And I think that's unfortunate. I'm sure there were really well-meaning people who were probably fired from the Department of Education and were trying to make the Department of Education a better place, so schools and colleges that receive federal funds would be great places of education. And I think